Making the right choice today can feel exhausting. Because we are constantly navigating moral gray areas, it makes perfect sense that we often retreat to the safety of strict black and white rulebooks. We want a clear list of do's and don'ts to do the heavy lifting for us. But rigid rules tend to shatter the moment they meet the messy reality of human life. If you commit to being endlessly passive and turning the other cheek in every scenario, you invite exploitation. If you swear to absolute, unfiltered honesty at all times, you will eventually cause deep, unnecessary harm to the people you care about. When those strict rules fail, we usually default to what feels like the safest alternative, splitting the difference. We assume that moderation in all things, or simply compromising between two sides of an argument, is the ethical high ground. Take a look at this scale. Your computer's value is $800, but a buyer offers $1. The midpoint is $400.50. Splitting the difference between objective truth and a ridiculous extreme fails logically. Over 2,000 years ago, Aristotle laid out an alternative to both strict rulebooks and lazy compromises. He proposed a system of ethics that demands constant, dynamic calibration. True ethical balance means abandoning the comforting safety of average compromises. It requires stepping into a much more demanding, highly active behavioral system. Aristotle's core framework relies on a delicate tension. He argues that every moral virtue exists suspended between two distinct, dangerous vices. This chart maps out a behavioral spectrum. On one side of any behavior, you have the vice of deficiency. On the opposite side, you have the vice of excess. Take courage, for example. Courage is the precise mean or middle state between a deficiency of confidence, which we call cowardice, and an excess of confidence, which is recklessness. This exact logic applies to all human interaction. Truthfulness is the required mean, balancing between the deficiency of false modesty and the excess of arrogant boastfulness. What this spectrum proves is that virtue is not simply the opposite of vice. It is a precarious, actively maintained equilibrium, holding its ground against two opposing methods of failure. It is tempting to look at this spectrum and aim straight for the exact center. But Aristotle's mean is not a fixed mathematical midpoint. It is a moving target that is entirely relative to us. Aristotle used the example of food rations to explain this. A proper, healthy portion of food for an average person would literally starve a giant. The right amount scales dynamically to the individual. This sliding scale logic applies perfectly to moral situations. The correct mean shifts dramatically depending on the immediate environmental context you find yourself in. If you are fighting a high-stakes life-or-death battle, passive moderation is fatal. In that specific environment, true courage might actually look like extreme recklessness to an outside observer. To navigate these constantly shifting contexts, we need a specific navigational tool. Aristotle called this Phronesis, or practical wisdom. It takes practical wisdom to correctly evaluate the specific environment you are standing in. Without the ability to read the room, the golden mean is impossible to find, rendering even your best intentions completely useless. Practical wisdom and moral virtue are not innate traits you are simply born with. They are mechanical skills, and you develop them through relentless repetition. Building moral character is a lot like mastering carpentry. You don't become courageous by sitting around analyzing the concept of courage. You become courageous by habitually doing courageous things. Aristotle offers a highly practical strategy for building this habit. He suggests identifying your own extreme personal biases and then deliberately overcorrecting your behavior to compensate for them. If you know you have a quick temper, you have to forcefully aim for total placidity. You have to bend yourself in the opposite direction just to drag your warped behavioral baseline back toward the center. We don't put ourselves through this relentless behavioral calibration just to pat ourselves on the back for being good. The ultimate objective is eudaimonia, true human flourishing. True ethical balance is an active, lifelong practice. By reading the room, knowing your own biases, and expertly calibrating your responses, you engineer a life that genuinely flourishes.